Today we will be discussing All India Muslim League, the formation of All India Muslim League, what was the historical background before the establishment of foundation of All India Muslim League, why was this a separate Muslim organization established for the Muslims. We will also be discussing the role of various political leadership throughout the phase of this history of All India Muslim League, and lastly we will be discussing the role of All India Muslim League in the freedom movement or the movement for Pakistan. To start with the All India Muslim League's formation, let us throw some light on the historical background of the All India Muslim League. As you all know that after the War of Independence 1857, the British attitudes towards Muslims was not very encouraging. Factually, both the Hindus and the Muslims had equally participated in the revolt of 1857 or the War of Independence of 1857, but only the Muslims had to bear the brunt. They were victimized, they were not given the jobs, the Muslims were discriminated against as they were the descendants of the conquerors. This is the initial legacy of Islam in the subcontinent, as Lawrence Jennings had rightly pointed out in his book. As you all know, we have discussed it earlier, there was scarcity of government office where a Muslim could get any good job other than that of a porter or a messenger. This discriminatory as well as repressive policy owes its origin back to the East India Company days, when in 1842 Lord Ellenborough, who was the Governor General of that time, in a letter to Duke of Wellington commented that the Muslims were fundamentally hostile towards the British and their enmity towards the government was confirmed. Being victim of such a suspicious British attitude, the Muslims boycotted the Anglo-Indian schools and also believed that such education would endanger their fate. They were not sending their children to the English schools and they were deprived of getting modern education. At this critical juncture, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan became active and guided the Muslims out of their social political torpor. He appealed to the Muslims to break the chains of false prejudices against the modernization of life, as he saw that the old world of rituals, of superstitions and of dogmas was dying and a new technological age was taking its place. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was convinced that if the Muslims and the British relations continued to be hostile and the Muslims kept themselves aloof from the modern education, there was no hope of regeneration for the Muslim community. He therefore committed himself to better the conditions of the Muslims and adopt various measures for this purpose. He first of all wanted to eliminate the distrust which was prevailing between the British and the Muslims. He thought it should be removed, and secondly he wanted the Muslims to get modern education. He started writing various articles for eliminating the distrust between the two main communities, the British and the Muslims. As we have discussed it earlier in the Risala Asbab-e Bagawat-e-Hind, he has mentioned all the factors that were responsible for the uprising of 1857. He also rejected the idea that Muslims were bound by their religion to wage a war against the Christianity or Christian religion. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan formed the British Indian Association in 1866, as we have discussed it in the previous class, to bring the ruler and the ruled closer to each other. For the uplift of Muslim education, he established various schools at Muradabad, at Ghazipur. He founded the Scientific Society, which was to translate the English work into native languages for introducing Western knowledge to the Indians. He had founded a school, Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental School at Aligarh, which became college later on, and after his death acquired the status of a university for the higher education of the Muslims of Indian subcontinent. As you can see, the forces active during this period determined the future course of Hindu-Muslim relations. The controversy of Urdu-Hindi, which was initiated in 1867, laid the bare thinking the Hindu world thinking about the Muslims. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was shocked, and for the very first time he became aware of his Hindu intentions, and he concluded that it would be difficult for the Hindus and the Muslims to go together as a nation. He therefore advised the Muslims to keep away from Indian National Congress, which was established in 1885. He could see that the Congress is going to serve only the objectives and motives of the Hindus, and it is not going to cater the needs of the Muslims of that time. He has observed it that the Congress took part in the anti-Urdu movement, and this stance of promoting and siding with the anti-Urdu movement basically helped Congress in achieving massive popularity among the Hindus, and it had totally ignored the sentiments of the Muslim during the movement for annulment of the partition of Bengal as well. Another second reason for the creation of or the establishment of All India Muslim League is that in 1905 Bengal was partitioned on the grounds of administrative reasons. This partition was favoring the Muslims of Indian subcontinent, particularly to the Bengalis Muslims. This partition, which was announced in 1905, was heavily opposed by Indian National Congress. The extremists in the Indian National Congress, they were against the partition, and they started an agitational politics, and an era of agitational politics is very evident from that period onwards. They were protesting at various levels. Because of these protests, later on in 1911, the British government had to annul the partition of Bengal, which was announced in 1905. These policies of Congress appeared to show itself as a Hindu body. Later on, the message was strengthened by when the Congress decided to adopt Bande Mataram, which is basically an anti-Muslim song, as a national anthem. The Muslims felt now that the Congress had a dream of establishing Hindu rule in India in the guise of representative government on the basis of their majority. Therefore, to solve this problem, Muslims started thinking on the grounds to form a separate political organization. These happenings changed the outlook of Muslim leadership towards Indian political life, and their minds were developing towards the need for a separate political organization of the Muslims in order to protect Muslim rights. Therefore, the Muslims founded a separate organization by stages, and Sir Syed gave the lead by founding the Anglo-Oriental Defence Association initially. Nawab Mohsinul Mulk, who succeeded him as a secretary to Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, Aligarh, urged emphatically the need for a separate political and social organization for the Muslims at the meeting of Urdu Defence Association in 1900. Vikarul Mulk, who was another leading colleague of Syed Ahmad Khan, also put forward this idea at the end of 1901. This very spirit made Nawab Salimullah from the Mohammedan Provincial Union in Bengal in 1905 as well. However, it was basically the year 1906 that the efforts of Indian Muslims were evident, and it bore the fruits. Disappointment very much was there, disappointed by the agitation for the annulment of partition of Bengal. A deputation of about 70 selected Muslim leaders, which was led by Sir Aga Khan, called on Lord Minto, who was the Viceroy of India, at Simla on October 1st. They requested that the interests of Muslims should be safeguarded. The Viceroy did not promise anything substantial to the deputation for fear of offending other communities, but he assured the Muslims that their political rights and interests as a community will be safeguarded by any administrative organization. The similar deputation proved a stepping stone in the history of the South Asian Muslims. The Muslims at that time demanded separate electorate in order to establish their separate national entity and protect their political interests. The Muslim desire for a separate political body of their own was further strengthened by the result of similar deputation. The Muslim leaders held a meeting on December 30th, 1906 to consider basically this aspect. Nawab Vikarul Mulk, who had presided over the meeting, said in his presidential address that the Muslims are only 1/5 of the population of India. It is obvious that if at any time the British government ceases to exist in India, the Hindus, who are 4 times more numerous, will rule the country. A resolution was passed which stated that this meeting, composed of Muslims from all parts of India assembled in Dhaka, decides that a political association be formed, styled the All India Muslim League. The long sought after object of the Indian Muslims attained a practical shape as All India Muslim League came into existence at that time. The All India Muslim League, when was established, had different objectives. Later on, it was reorganized on different grounds. Initially, the aims and objectives of All India Muslim League were firstly to promote feelings of loyalty among Muslims towards the British government. Secondly, to protect and advance the political rights and interests of Muslims. And lastly, to prevent the rise of any feelings of hostility towards other communities. The first objective of the Muslim League, which was to promote feelings of loyalty, had been subjected to severe criticism, and it has often been alleged that the Muslim League was created not to safeguard the Muslim interest but to strengthen the British rule in India, and it was trying to inculcate the loyalty feelings instead of safeguarding the Muslim rights. Time proved the allegation was not correct. The Muslim League changed its objective and became progressive at the proper time. With the passage of time, the objectives were changed, and anti-League propaganda, which was launched by Congress, it was fading off. Like the League, the Congress too had shown loyalty to British Raj in the beginning, while in practical terms, no political organization could work effectively without showing some kind of loyalty to the colonial masters. It is basically the time that first regular League session was held on December 29th till December 30th, 1907 at Karachi. The objectives of Muslim League were redefined a year later in the constitution adopted at this session. It met again on March 18, 1908 at Aligarh. This meeting of the League became the starting point of its activities in the Indian political life. In this session, a resolution was passed to impress upon the government to accept the Muslim demand as incorporated in the similar deputation address. The decade following 1909 reforms was important in this political history of India. The Muslim League aligned its policy with the changing circumstances very cleverly. The 1909 reforms were encouraging for the Muslims, and they began to feel more secure since their demand for separate representation had been accepted in the Minto Marley reforms of 1909. But what happened in 1911 was there was an announcement for the sudden annulment of partition of Bengal. This announcement came as a shock to their faith in the government and was rightly looked upon as a gross betrayal. Muslims were very disappointed. The year 1912 witnessed the Balkan Wars, which sent a wave of sorrow and dismay over the Indian Muslims. Various newspapers like Zamindar, Al-Hilal, The Comrade, they wrote articles in favor of the political consciousness, and this rapidly growing consciousness among the Muslims was finding an expression in day-to-day meetings. The educated and progressive Muslims were of the view that League structure should be changed. now to meet the requirements of the new developments. Accordingly, the Muslim League amended its constitution, and on March 22nd, 1913, it adopted a new objective, which is basically the attainment under the aegis of the British Crown of a system of self-representative, self-government and self-representation, which is suitable for the India. This change in the League's objective brought it nearer to the Congress. The need for a united front of Hindus and Muslims was being expressed in all political quarters, and this was the proper time to bring both the major parties together. A committee was formed under the chairmanship of Muhammad Ali Jinnah to search a solution in the constitution with the Congress regarding future reforms for the Indians. Finally, Lucknow Pact was signed in December 1916. It basically is an event in which the Congress and the League entered into a pact at a joint session of the two parties, and this pact is one of the most important events in the Indian political history, because for the very first and the last time the two communities agreed upon one constitutional draft, which is basically self-government, immediately after the war. The Rowlatt Act, which was passed in 1918 after the war, was strongly resented by the Indians, and this was termed as Black Law, turning the entire political atmosphere into anti-British activities. The sentiments were so bitter against the government that when the announcement for Peace Celebration Day was held on December 13, 1919, the Muslims formed an anti-peace celebration committee to prevent the Muslims from participating in the festival. You can see that after the First World War came into end, the Khilafat movement started in India in 1919. The Khilafat agitation began with protests against the Rowlatt Bills, and the common line of action was taken by the Hindus as well as the Muslims. The Congress and the League held their sessions jointly in Amritsar in 1919, and they were against the British policies of dividing the sacred places of Muslims' holy land. This Khilafat session basically is this Khilafat episode is basically another important event, because the politics following the Khilafat committees and the Khilafat movement, there was a rift between the representatives of Muslim League. At this juncture, the Muslim League split into two groups. One was under Sir Muhammad Shafi and the other was under Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The basic difference of opinion was on the issue of cooperation with the Simon Commission. Both the groups held separate meetings in Lahore and Calcutta respectively. Jinnah group decided to cooperate with the All Parties Conference, as Jinnah was still hopeful that some solution of the communal problems could be found. But the subsequent hostile Congress attitude disappointed him later on, when the Nehru report was passed in 1928. In March 1929, Sir Muhammad Shafi and Muhammad Ali Jinnah met in Delhi and agreed to unite the two groups. You can see that it is basically the time before the reorganization of Muslim League. We can also discuss upon that there were various political provincial leagues that were established with the establishment of All India Muslim League. These political parties and the provincial Muslim leagues, they played an important role. The basic structure of All India Muslim League was that a league was to have an executive body comprising of a president, vice president, a secretaries, joint secretaries. The central committee was to elect president for each annual session. There were two permanent presidents from 1908 till 1919. One was the Aga Khan and second the Raja of Mahmudabad. After 1934, the League elected its president annually, and All India Muslim League started with Mohsin ul Mulk and Wazir ul Mulk as joint secretaries. The provincial Muslim leagues was also the need of the hour. The Muslims warmly welcomed the All India Muslim League, and it soon opened its branches in various provinces. In April 1907, Maulvi Rafiuddin Ahmad set up a branch at Pune. He himself was appointed as its secretary, while the Aga Khan was named as president. In 1909, League was organized at district level in various parts of Deccan. In the same year, the Deccan Muslim League was formed to be known as Bombay Presidency Muslim League. A similar branch was set up in East Bengal as well in 1909. Maulvi Riziuddin and Nawab of Dhaka were nominated as presidents and secretary. In November 1908, the Prince of Arcot and Nawab Yaqub Hassan were elected as the president and secretary of Madras Muslim League. Mian Muhammad Shafi founded the Punjab Muslim League on December 1, 1907. Another branch of Muslim League was set up in London. It was decided to establish the London branch of the League. The inauguration meeting was held on May 6, 1908 at London's Caxton Hall. It was participated by the Muslims and those British who favored the Muslim viewpoint of having a separate political organization. This London Muslim League branch meeting was presided over by Sayyid Amir Ali, and it had various objectives in its mind. The first one was to promote accord and harmony among different nationalities of India. The second was to work for the advancement of the general interest of the country in harmony with and in concert with the other Indian communities. It also wanted to bring the Mohammedans so far as possible into touch with leaders of thought in England, and it wanted to safeguard the constitutional rights of the Mohammedan subjects of the British Empire. The Muslim League was there, the change in the constitution was there. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was once again very active in the reorganization of this All India Muslim League, and after the reorganization of this All India Muslim League, this Muslim League basically played an important role in the freedom movement of Pakistan. We will be discussing the freedom movement of Pakistan with this formation of All India Muslim League in our next lecture. What were the services of All India Muslim League for the movement of Pakistan will be discussed in detail, starting from the establishment of a separate Muslim identity, formation of a separate Muslim identity, to the Allahabad address, later on the Lahore resolution, later on the plan for partition, and Muslim League services for the partition of Indian subcontinent. We will be discussing all these in our next class.